this workshop actually at Ohio State because I was really interested in introverts and extroverts. I identify as an introvert, strongly as an introvert, and realized that was having a big impact on my teaching and also the way that I behave in the classroom. And I got really interested in it after reading Susan Cain's book, Quiet. I don't know if you're familiar with that book at all. It was pretty popular a few years ago. It's all about how the world is being sort of increasingly built for extrovert tendencies. So I was thinking about this in relation to the classroom. So what I want to do is just sort of have some time to reflect on where you fall. If you don't already know, that quiz is a pretty quick way to tell you. Share some of the research on introversion and extroversion. I've certainly learned a lot in doing the work for this. And then thinking about how it applies to teaching. So just to start, what does it actually mean to be an introvert? What does it mean to be an extrovert? Introverts aren't necessarily shy. I think a lot of times people associate shyness with introversion. That's not always the case. I'm an introvert, I'm not particularly shy. Very functional social skills, I think. But introverts are generally really drained by social interactions. So doing lots of meet and greets. Sarah, I see you nodding. Does that sound familiar to you? Especially if you're in a new environment, if you're an introvert, that can be really, really taxing. Introverts tend to be also more sensitive to stimuli, just cognitively sensitive, physiologically sensitive to stimuli. So for me, for example, when I first started this job and I was meeting with new people every day, and in this new environment, this new situation, I would get home at night and I was exhausted. I was just dead at the end of the night. Now that I'm a little more comfortable, I can have a lot of meetings and see a lot of people, and I don't feel quite as drained by the end of the day. Introverts also need more time to process if they're really overstimulated. So if they're in a really new environment, it can be really difficult to think on their feet just because they're more sensitive to stimuli. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Extroverts, on the other hand, are generally really energized by interactions. We had a guest speaker here not too long ago who was a good friend of mine, and that day she gave a guest lecture in my class, she interviewed for another academic job, she gave a workshop to faculty, and then she gave a workshop to students. And at the end of the day, I was like, you have to be completely exhausted. She's like, nope, I'm energized. Like, let's go out. Let's go out and get a drink and celebrate all this. You and I are wired differently. Extroverts are also pretty comfortable sharing or developing incomplete ideas. You might see that in your students, the ones who are very comfortable thinking on their feet, talking on their feet, that kind of thing. And they are overall generally less physiologically sensitive to stimuli, noises, bright lights, that kind of thing. But it's important to remember that extroverts aren't necessarily natural leaders or good leaders. Sometimes they're just the ones who are talking first or most loudly, and that can be mistaken as a leadership quality. So where does it come from? According to the digest of all the neuroscience around it, temperament, which introversion and extroversion are bits of temperament, are probably 40-50% dictated by genetics. But it also comes from experiences. So when I designed this workshop, I did it with a friend of mine who identifies as an ambivert. And she's right in the middle of introversion and extroversion. And she thinks that she would have been more of an extrovert, but she grew up an only child and kind of out in the woods. So she ended up cultivating a lot of ways of being in the world that look more like introverts. She likes to work alone. She's pretty good at focusing on things a long time. She really enjoys being by herself, but she also really thrives in the company of others. I, on the other hand, grew up in a very similar situation, out in the woods, oldest child by many years, really no friends around, and that just made my introversion magnified. And like I was saying, a lot of this comes from the levels of reactivity to stimuli. And there have been a bunch of studies on babies and twins and that kind of thing, and they found out that the reactivity to stimuli really is something that you have when you're born. I'm sure you know more about this kind of stuff, amygdala function and temperament, given your background, so I'm not going to get too into the details on that. But this temperament is actually related to part of the brain. Personality, on the other hand, is more complex. That's shaped by experiences, that's shaped by learned behaviors. So temperament's more of a predisposition, and personality is all the experiences that take those predispositions and turn them into something. Like I was saying before, there are lots of roots to introversion. So like mine, I spend a lot of time alone. I'm also predisposed to being an introvert. And then my friends who sort of develop some of those characteristics. But it's also important that this is not a totalizing aspect of a person's personality or their temperament, right? So you can be uncomfortable in new cities but love to travel. That describes me. I have a hard time with new things, but I also really like new things at the same time. I have to sort of push myself over that hump. Or introverts, for example, can really like hearing personal stories, really like one-on-one conversations, but sort of have a hard time getting over that initial hump of meeting a new person. So it's complex. As I was saying, highly reactive people are more likely to be introverts because they're just more sensitive to stimuli. So being in an environment with a lot going on just is more cognitive load. It's just straight up more cognitive load. So they might gravitate to the life of the mind or solitary pursuits like music or art, things that really require a lot of focus, a lot of time alone, honing skills. I think a lot of academics are probably introverts for this reason, spend a long time sort of focused on one project. Maybe particularly in the kinds of disciplines where collaboration isn't as common, so maybe in the humanities or in the performing arts, well, maybe not in theater, but in terms of musicians and that kind of thing, and visual artists. And most of us we cultivate skills that align with environments that we feel comfortable in, which makes total sense, right? We're going to be drawn to the places and the kinds of experiences that most suit our personalities. And then that becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So you are sort of drawn to that, you end up doing more of it, and then here you are sort of actualizing this introversion or extroversion. Low reactive people, so people who are less reactive to stimuli, are more likely to be extroverts. And I think this particular piece here is very interesting. So early on in childhood, they're more likely to take risks because they're not as sensitive to stimuli, and then they become more risk-taking people and more comfortable taking risks over time. So you just sort of develop a comfort doing these things, just like the introverts tend to be drawn to experiences, that keep them sort of protected from stimuli. Extroverts become even more desensitized to it over time. They tend to have more physical and social skills because it does involve a certain amount of risk, and might struggle to take time for solitary practice, so reading, music, that kind of thing. Maybe. It really depends on the person, but the sort of general, just to paint pretty broad strokes. Oops. So for work tendencies, that's what I really needed to think about with my own students. Introverts need a lot of preparation to speak well in front of others, really need to carefully prepare themselves. I've seen some of my students do this. They will actually write down what they want to say before participating in a conversation, instead of just jumping right in and saying something. I try to build it into my classes a little bit more, giving them time to write about it. They work a little bit more slowly. They can work more slowly, but they are more likely to choose the correct answer because they proceed through things a little bit more slowly. It's not the sort of thinking out loud kind of thing. And also, introversion tends to be comorbid with things like perfectionism, because of that sort of sensitivity to stimuli and that sort of thing. They prefer to focus on one task at a time. They tend to be really good listeners, tend to dislike conflict, and prefer deep discussions to small talk. Extroverts, on the other hand, really comfortable thinking on their feet. They'll tackle assignments really quickly. They'll jump right in to do things. They'll make decisions pretty quickly, which can be good or bad. Sometimes you need a fast decision. Sometimes you need to think about it a little bit more. And they're more comfortable with taking risks, with conflict, with conversation, that kind of thing. So I'm curious to hear from you where you fall on the spectrum. Do you know?
I'd say more introvert.
Okay.
Definitely.
What about other people that you see on a daily basis, that you work with? Do you feel like you have a good sense of where they are?
I think so. I think it's hard because I work really more one-on-one. I supervise clinics. I don't actually teach, and so even within that, I have a lot of co-clinicians. And so just thinking I have 2 students in mind right now that are co-clinicians, and one I think is definitely more extroverted, one is more introverted. And so during our meeting times, I hear so much more from the extrovert than the introvert, and she actually asked me about that. Do you feel like, I feel like I'm not having enough time to share, and I don't know that I addressed that as much as I perhaps needed to this semester, just reflecting on it as far as the sharing. And but I think I get a pretty good feeling of the students that I work with. Your question, do you mean as far as my family members?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think I have a pretty good idea. I mean, just listening to the definitions and thinking about it, reflecting on my family, I could definitely say that when the kids are sort of starting to fall, I have two children, age 11 and 13, and so I think they're kind of on different ends.
Oh, yeah?
But, yeah. My daughter tending to be more introverted, my son being more extrovert. Or maybe more towards the middle, he would be. As he's gotten older, he's taking less risks, but he's still more of a risk taker. But, yeah.
It's funny, my brother identifies really strongly as an introvert as well, but he is, once he's comfortable in a situation, he is a crazy risk taker.
Yeah.
I mean, he knows all sorts of water skiing tricks and snowmobiling on open water, that kind of thing. I mean, he's just doing wild stuff all the time. So, yeah, they're totalizing categories, obviously.
Right.
Okay, so it's important to know where you fall yourself, because not knowing where you fall can cause some conflict. So, for example, my partner right now does not have a job, so he's home all day. And I was telling you, I'm starting a new job here, I've got these meetings all day long, I go home and like, just don't talk to me for an hour. Meanwhile, he's pretty extroverted. Well, he'd call himself an introvert, I think he needs extrovert. And he's like, let's go out, let's do things, let's meet people, I've been here all day long. So, we have to navigate that sort of different needs at the end of the day. He had the day that I kind of needed, and I had the day that he needed. But we're working on that. But it can be important to figure out what actually works well for you so that you can make choices that will give you more energy. One of the things that like I said, with all these meetings when I first started, I realized I had to start blocking off time in my calendar just to kind of restore in the middle of the day. Because I used to just leave my Outlook calendar open and people will just put things in it and they'll just fill it right up. So I started putting in work time just so I could decompress, for like 2 hours a day and feel like I was getting caught up on things. So when I wasn't doing that, when I was fighting that tendency, it was wearing me out. And then I can help you figure out how you can sort of stay in your sweet spot. So if you are a more extroverted person, maybe there are ways you can build in opportunities to talk to people throughout the day, especially if you spend a lot of time maybe alone in an office or that sort of thing. And then this is also something that I have to keep in mind. It's like it can be easy to misinterpret other people's actions through your own preferences. To see an introverted person as being shy, to see an extroverted person as being maybe overbearing or overly needy, and really just recognizing that those are just differences in temperament. So there's a spectrum, obviously, and it's complex, and there are lots of other ways that you can look at this. You can look at the Myers-Briggs thing, or the Enneagram, or there are plenty of personality typing things that will give you some more information about how those other personality aspects might interact with introversion or extroversion. But right now I kind of want to think about sort of your experiences, and we were talking a little bit about before, but thinking on your own relationship to teaching or supervising students, are there particular things that you do that you recognize as giving you a lot of energy, or that you find Which is funny because my introversion is sort of forcing my students to do very extroverted kinds of things in the classroom. Lots of active learning, lots of discussing, lots of talking. So I'm sort of like letting myself off the hook and putting them on it in a way. So I really have accommodated my own preferences as maybe not accommodating all of my students as well as I would like. So I do keep that in mind. And a lot of people have to stretch themselves when they're teaching. Not all of us like to be sort of out there gregariously handling a room. So, and it sounds like you have done that and figured out ways to cope.
Right.
Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about how different aspects of culture, of American, Western, late capitalist culture are kind of structured around what works for extroverts right now. We're kind of having we're in sort of a moment where, lots of connectedness and collaboration is kind of everywhere. It's everywhere in the way that we think about the workplace and education and how we structure our lives. So I thought this was kind of a funny little graphic of how different this is for me. An extrovert's brain, right? So lots of quick ways to chime into another person's conversation, jump right in, super into your Facebook and Twitter, make sure you know what's going on all the time, like sort of needing that constant stimulus to keep you going. Pizza, I like pizza too, I don't think that's an extrovert thing. Elaborate excuses to leave somewhere so you can get to another thing. I'm the other way around. I always build an out everything that I'm going to. Sarah's nodding back there. Not an elaborate excuse, but I always have a plan, like, all right, here's my excuse for leaving. Gotta go take care of the dogs or whatever it is. Small talk subjects, hating canceled plans. As an introvert, I love canceled plans because that's just like hours I get back to myself to be able to restore. Even though I like doing things. So I thought that was pretty funny because it's so unlike myself. So in the business world, Susan Cain was looking at this in her book Quiet, trying to think about how the business world is increasingly structured for extroverts. And this is why it's important to also remember that we have to get our students to stretch, and we have to stretch ourselves, right? Because the world can't accommodate every individual's personal preference. But we can be more mindful of the variety of temperaments and personalities that we encounter. So there's a lot of emphasis on group work, using small group, doing small group projects, collaborative learning, lots of team-based work. My brother works at Century, the Introvert, and they just remodeled his area. He works in IT, and they're doing an open concept plan, so it's just going to be people sitting at sort of pods with their computers now, and he is dreading it. Although fortunately he says he's in enough meetings throughout the day that he wouldn't have to be at his desk that often, but he's really, really not looking forward to it because that's really hard for him. He needs to sort of at least retreat into his cubicle a little bit. But there's a lot of sort of buzz around having open workspaces and people just sort of having the free flow of communication and conversation without recognizing that for some people that's actually really draining and counterproductive. This was shocking to me that 70% of employees work in an open plan office in the United States. This is in 2012 when we wrote the book. 70%. I thought this was a pretty interesting piece of information that the average square footage per employee, and we can imagine lots of reasons for this, economic reasons, whatever, shrank from 500 square feet per person in the 70s to 200 square feet that's 2012, I think. Sorry, the number's missing on that. That is a significant shrinkage of square footage. I feel very lucky to work in an environment where most people seem to have some space.
That's interesting.
And the argument is that innovation comes from social contact. And Malcolm Gladwell has made that argument. I'm not a huge Malcolm Gladwell fan, but a lot of people believe that this is where good ideas happen. And it is true that collaboration can be important for good ideas. But that's not always the case because it does end up leaving some people out of the conversation. So if you aren't a super extroverted person and you're in a very boisterous group, for example, your ideas can sort of get lost in the mix. They actually talked about, in that book Quiet, right at the beginning, she talks about the Harvard Business School and how they are really into collaboration and they give their students this exercise, which when I do a longer version of this workshop, I use sometimes, where they have they imagine that they're in a float plane and it's crashed somewhere off the coast of Newfoundland or something, so it's Arctic temperatures, and they have 20 items, and they need to figure out which 5 of those things that they can take with them to survive. Have you ever done this activity?
No, I've heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a group activity, and you're supposed to figure it out and then present your solution to the larger group in a debrief. And in the story that Susan Cain tells, there's a student, an introverted student, who's in one of these groups and is not particularly boisterous or outgoing, and thinks carefully before he speaks, has a hard time contributing, and gets totally talked over by the other people in the group, even though he actually is like a survivalist hiker person and he has all this expertise. So his ideas totally get lost, and his team ended up presenting the wrong solution to the problem. And that can happen a lot, I think. And there are other reasons for that too. I mean, there are obviously cultural reasons that people might be quieter in groups, and social reasons. So this is also a major trend in K-12 education, so lots of using pods of tables in grade schools instead of the sort of stage on the stage setup like we have right here, right now. Using group work in all kinds of different classes. We see this in higher education as well, including math, and there are some real benefits to that. Students teaching each other, learning about their own learning, that kind of thing. But doing it all the time is difficult for some students. And then we get the idea that students take ownership of their education and they learn from each other. I believe in that. I believe in active learning. I believe in collaboration. But again, it can be used too much, and it's almost can become a detriment of the class to certain kinds of students. And it also sort of pushes a particular model of leadership on every student. So you get the sort of idea that to be a leader, you have to be the louder student, the more outgoing student. And if you don't fit that mold, then maybe you don't have leadership qualities, or you're very uncomfortable doing that, start second guessing yourself. So there could be some real disadvantages to using this particular model all the time. But like I said, there are good reasons for doing group work. It can change your own ways of thinking. But it really favors extroverts, and it doesn't always produce the best results. In fact, I thought this was very interesting, when they did some research on brainstorming, they found out that whether you're brainstorming in groups or by yourself, the quality of ideas is just as good. So, maybe brainstorming is a time when you give students options. Would you like to think by yourself or talk in a group? And, rest assured that they're going to do a good job both ways. And solitude can also be a catalyst to innovation. So like you were saying, if there's lots of stimuli, you're listening to music, it's really hard to think. I can't do that. I could never. When I was working at the teaching center at Ohio State, we had a number of grad students working for us, and they worked in an open spot, kind of in a pod, in the middle of the office. And several of them would work on their dissertations after their work hours, just sitting in that pod working on things. And I have no idea how that was a functional way of being, but for them it worked. I need to be alone to think with my thoughts and just have the space to breathe and the lack of distraction. So I'm wondering if you have seen some of these things happening in higher education, if just based on what you hear from colleagues in your department or what you hear from students.
Yeah,
a lot of team-based learning. Are you familiar with Eric Mazur's work at all? He's a chemistry professor from MIT, and he got very frustrated when he realized that, or maybe he was at Harvard, somewhere in Boston. He realized that after his students have taken all these classes, you can ask them these sort of basic questions about chemistry or about science or upon graduation, and they can't actually answer them. And he's like, what have I been doing with my time? That these students are graduating with a Harvard degree and they're answering very basic questions about like the rotation of the earth stupidly. So he's like, why? I thought I was doing a great job. I'm getting good evaluations. My students are doing well on their exams. What's going on here? So he sort of radically decided to rethink the way that he was going about his teaching process, and now uses pretty much all collaborative learning in all of his classes. So all students, he gives them tests where, as just one example, where there are like 10 questions, and 6 of the questions should be pretty accessible to everybody, and then 2 are a little bit harder, and then 2 are almost impossible. And he makes them take the test first by themselves. And then they get in groups, so they get a score for their individual performance, and then they get in groups and they work on the test together. And the harder questions are written to be so difficult that there's no way that a single student by themselves can really figure it out, that they have to sort of do group work. And he's had tremendous success with it. Now he tours all over the country telling these stories. He's a great speaker. But that's not for everybody. He talks about that too. He says to his students, this is not going to be your typical chemistry lecture. It's not the way this class is going to work. If you are more comfortable in that format, there are plenty of other people that teach that way here. But I thought that was really interesting. I'm really compelled by his ideas and his ways of teaching, but I also know that as a student, that would be very difficult for me, for everything to be a group project, constantly socially interacting. So, as I was saying, it's really important to think about how we can change these things, because we have to all function in this world, right? Where different things demand of us, right? Like part of my job is giving workshops and standing up here, even though I'm an introvert, and this is not the most energizing thing for me to do, even though I really enjoy it. So we can sort of stretch it, we can develop behaviors that will stretch our abilities within the bounds of your general disposition toward personality. So recognizing, finding ways to take a break if you need it, finding ways to get more stimulation if you need it, more social stimulation if you need it, and sort of pulling at the edges of that. And I tell that to my students too when I talk about participation grades. I tell my students that I didn't speak in class pretty much all through graduate school, and I was in a lot of humanities seminars. I would just sit there and listen, and my faculty were always very happy with my work, but I got not scolded, but told in my annual review every year that I didn't talk enough in class. And it was very hard for me. So I started challenging myself toward the end of my coursework to say one thing per class. So I tell my students that too. You have to, if you are sort of inclined toward introversion, just challenge yourself. Challenge yourself to say one thing a week in class. You don't have to be the most talkative person. You can show that you're engaged with the material in other ways. You can reflect it in your written work, or if you want to write to me after class, you can do that kind of thing. There are lots of ways to show that you are present and you are engaged. I know that participation and presence doesn't always look like talking, but they do need to challenge themselves. And for my extroverted students too, I sort of challenge them to try and think about things and maybe write things out a little bit more, or give other people a chance to talk in class. A lot of them are actually pretty aware of whether they're really extroverted and like to talk all the time, and they'll ask if they're participating too much, which I'm very happy with. It's good self-awareness. So as I was saying, one of the reasons we have to stretch our personalities is because for introverts in particular, if you're too quiet, sometimes your ideas can just get glossed over, they can get lost. So if you can't participate in that meeting, and that's the meeting where all the decisions are being made, and all the ideas are being generated, and you don't say anything until afterwards, you might have missed your chance. So pushing yourself to do things can help actually desensitize you. So as I was saying earlier, introverts are generally more sensitive to stimuli. So the more you sort of get over that, that initial hump, the more you can become desensitized to that stimuli. That becomes a more familiar experience too, so it's easier to engage in it again. It is important to do things a lot of times to get positive feedback, whether that's verbal validation or just having a positive experience in some other way. And you can also scaffold activities that produce anxiety. So this is what I do with my students, and I try and get them to just say one thing in class per week. And hopefully in the next class they'll say maybe one thing per class period or something. I always think this is funny, that public speaking is the #1 fear among Americans. Public speaking, not death, not car accidents, not the loss of a loved one, public speaking. So getting yourself over that hump in small ways can be really useful. And that's why there are groups like Toastmasters and that kind of thing to help people with that. And finding ways that you can be really engaged in the subject, doing it in a way, for something that you really care about, can help sort of make you more enthusiastic and make you feel more motivated. Because another thing about introverts, because of the sort of cognitive load of what else is going on, is they have a harder time faking enthusiasm. It's just harder, because there's all this other stuff going on. So it's really hard to remember, like, I gotta smile, I gotta stand tall, I gotta be really jolly here, because you're just trying to navigate the situation, right? So that's additional cognitive load, mustering enthusiasm. So when that's there, when there's some intrinsic motivation, it can be a little bit easier. So that can be helpful when thinking about students and group work and everything as well. So for extroverts, they might quit on things before they have time to really cultivate their talents, because they're drawn to the next new thing, another exciting thing, like let's go explore that, let's take another risk. So sort of finding moments or ways to get the extroverts to work on sort of protracted thinking, thinking by themselves, working alone, can be really powerful. And those are also important skills too, right? Because it's not like we're all constantly in a group meeting. Like sometimes you do have to go to your office and do work on your own. And then there are ways that you can sort of be really deliberate about that. So if there are particular concepts or skills you've already mastered, fine, don't work on that, but focus on maybe individual steps and not the big picture. Extroverts sometimes are just like big picture on to the next whole thing. So really focusing on that smaller piece can be useful. And this is the thing I wasn't doing enough in my classes, making my extroverts do that kind of stuff in class. Do things alone. Yeah. Outside of class, yeah.
Right, exactly. Those are the assignments that you do, but I don't know that we encourage them on the spot to do that.
Yeah, and then I think it ends up being hard for them to do it outside of class. We're not really practicing that in class.
Right.
And they need work sort of focusing and writing and just thinking kind of one-on-one. It's hard to expect them to necessarily figure out how to do that outside of class. And I think that's why extroverts, I've noticed a trend, I don't know if there's data around this, seems like they tend to procrastinate a little more than introverts do, honestly, on their work. And they kind of, work on their papers the last minute, work on their projects the last minute.
Right.
So it's hard to sit down if you're just working on
actually do that, yeah.
Yeah. So it makes sense, it's not a weakness necessarily, it's just it's a temperament issue. Okay, so what I want to do for this last little bit is to think about maybe your own courses or students that you're working with or teaching methods that you gravitate toward, and think about where your teaching style or the teaching style that you see around here falls on the spectrum. And it's funny because here in educational development, educational psychology, we're so into this like active learning, engage, group work, get your students doing stuff together, get them talking together side of things. But that can really be difficult for the introverts. It also works really well for if you have international students, because they have the additional cognitive load of translating between two different languages. So it can be very difficult for them to think on their feet because that's a lot going on up there already. So giving them a chance to sort of write down their ideas first can be helpful, slows things down a little bit. Or if you know, if you're having sort of a tense moment in the classroom too, if for whatever reason, something sort of difficult comes up, stopping and having everybody pause and write about it can be useful too, because it gives people a sort of chance to reflect on themselves, on, you know, discussion norms and community classroom and that kind of thing. So it has lots of other benefits beyond just serving the introverts, right? Sort of a universal design principle. Having lots of variety in your class can work for lots of different kinds of students, have benefits for everybody. And it's important in learning to have moments of comfort and moments of growth, right? We want learning to be sort of a safe experience, but it can't be necessarily an easy experience, because learning is change and change is hard. Which is what I always say to people. There's no way, if you're not changing, you're not learning. And I don't know anybody for whom change is the easiest thing on earth, right? Like growth it's difficult. Not necessarily bad, but it's hard. So there's actually a couple of blogs on Tumblr that I found when I was doing research for this, of students just sharing their issues in college classrooms around being introverts and being extroverts. So I thought this was kind of funny. Like, you're in college and you still have group projects in every class, right? Like, when do I get to just be like the good student on my own?
Yeah.
Getting nervous about class participation points, having to do presentations all the time. Lots of classes end with a presentation. Lots and lots of classes end with a presentation. And then extrovert problems. So this is a student who probably is in a lot of lecture courses, right? So only one class is taught according to your learning style. The rest of them is a sort of passive learning thing. That can be really difficult for an extrovert to focus because they need more of that interaction, that stimulation. Or you're in a super quiet class where no one's talking, right? That can be difficult. That's difficult for a teacher too, introvert or extrovert. Or teachers that assume that lots of chatter means that you're not focused, that you're not on task, when really that can be an important part of being on task. So, words from the mouths of students, what are the key words anyway? So like you were saying, we can give all of our students opportunities to stretch and use some of their natural strengths. So thinking about moments of comfort and moments of growth for all of your students, and recognizing that what's a moment of comfort for one group of students might be. I've actually started talking to my students about that a little bit, doing small groups. I found out that in almost every class I taught, half of my students hate small groups, and the other half of my students love small groups. So I will tell them, now we're doing small groups. Half of you really love this, the other half of you would rather be a large group discussion, but you get your time to have a large group discussion, so everybody gets a little something here. It's not really just about, you know, being happy necessarily for all of your students, making them more comfortable. It really pushes them all. You can build in steps to make different activities more inclusive and productive. So, like you were saying, maybe doing the think, pair, share kind of activity, not just right into the large group discussion. Divide, or have your students divide their group work if you are going to have them do a group project based on their strengths. Have them do a little bit of self-reflection, have a little bit of self-awareness about what their preferences are. Talk to them about introversion and extroversion, and think about, you know, what's a good role for me to play in this group, because groups function best when there's diversity within them. People bring their different strengths to the groups. Also, this helps deal with the problem of slackers in groups. If everybody has a very specific role based on their strengths and are assigned that role, and it's negotiated amongst the group, instead of just saying, go do a group project. Another thing that I've been thinking about a lot, that I've been trying to do a lot in workshops also, and in the classroom, is just giving my students the option. Do you want to work on your own right now? As a person, if you want to work with somebody else, raise your hand. Okay, anybody else in the room who wants to work with somebody else, go work with somebody who's raising their hand right now. Get in groups of 2 or 3. The rest of you, if you want to just work on this by yourself right now, you can do that. If you want to just think about it by yourself. Not everybody has to be doing the same thing all the time, right? And it also gives students some agency over their own learning. And it's good. It's good for their awareness of how they learn and what their preferences are. It's good for their metacognition, which is a really important part of learning. And they become more invested in the class too. You can give them deliberate practice and collaboration, deliberate practice for collaboration, have them do things online, set up groups in D2L, for example, that can help scaffold up to more face-to-face stuff. Keep in mind that introverts need time and space to retreat, talking to your students about that, and that extroverts need opportunities to engage with others. So these are some of the just things to keep in mind, some principles to keep in mind. Scaffolding, giving space, but also time for engagement, and just options. I mean, options are so powerful. Another thing that can be really helpful is just being super explicit with your students about why they're being asked to do certain things in the class. And this is true regardless of what kind of teaching method you're using or what sort of challenge you're facing. Tell them why the course activities, the learning activities meet your objectives. Why is it really important that your students do group presentations? What does that have to do with the content of your course? They might not know, you might know, but students don't see all that background designing and planning and all that thinking unless you're super explicit about it. I often tell people that when I was in undergrad, I went to a small liberal arts college, so all of my courses were small seminars. And you do the reading outside of class, and you come to class, and you talk about stuff, and I assumed that my professors basically just picked the readings, and then just showed up to class, and then just relied on us to have a conversation about it. And then that was sort of the bulk of their work. And then when I started teaching myself, I realized there is so much more planning going on in the background here. Like, there's a very specific reason that things are sequenced this way. There's a reason they're picking particular teaching methods, particular kinds of group work at different moments. There's a reason they're asking specific kinds of questions, but I never saw that as a student. I was a good student and I love my faculty members. It's not like I thought they were lazy or something. I just didn't have that framework for understanding all the decision making that was going on. So I think making that really explicit to your students can be really, really helpful in motivating them and helping them sort of see a purpose in challenging themselves, stretching themselves, facing those moments of comfort, those moments of growth as you're presenting them. It can also be useful to talk to your students, as I was saying before, very briefly, about introversion and extroversion, recognizing that is a way that they're different. And your students might not know that about themselves, right? They might think that they're shy or they're not good leaders if they're introverts, and extroverts might think that they're like on top of the game all the time because they're talking and they've always got something to say in class, and that might not necessarily be the case. So helping them see how different aspects of introversion and extroversion can be related to different discipline-specific skills can be really useful. So maybe for your introverted students, planning out those conversations in advance, like that might come more naturally to them. They might be more comfortable doing that, really thinking carefully about how they're going to approach a parent. And extroverted students might not gravitate toward that. They might want to kind of read over their notes and then wing it a little bit. But talking to them about why it's really important to do that, to cultivate that, even though it might not be the thing that comes to them naturally. That is all that I have, so if you have other questions, I'd be glad to talk about them. Here are just a couple of references. They're on the back of one of the sheets, too.